Hello, I'm Amari Jones and welcome to Caffeine TV, your daily video news brief. Here to take you through 3 headline numbers in just 3 minutes, giving you a different take on everything from housing policy to the Real Housewives. I was going to wear a gas mask on my head like Don Lemon did last night on CNN, but it would have messed up my hair and didn't seem to do him a whole lot of good. The first number up today is 1166. Now, that's the year in which grand juries were instituted for the first time in recorded human history. That happened in England and was done by the English crown. Now, last night, a legal descendant of that original grand jury decided to not indict Officer Wilson for the tragic death of Michael Brown. But the point of grand juries is pretty straightforward. They are a check on a process which could ultimately deprive someone of their liberty, forcing them to stand trial and sending them to jail. And what they figure out is whether or not the state is just making up evidence for something that never even happened, or whether or not there is enough real evidence to bring about a criminal trial in which guilt or innocence will be assessed. And that's why the remarks last night of St. Louis County Prosecutor Robert McCullough were so earth-shattering, because what he described were not the deliberations of a grand jury, but of a criminal trial, the one that took place in secret without a judge and without a prosecutor and defense going at each other and with no transparency. And so no, they didn't end up indicting Officer Wilson for the tragic death of Michael Brown, but it seems in order to get that result that they had to overturn 1,000 years of Anglo-American jurisprudence in order to make that happen. The next number up today is 90, as in the number of cities across the United States in which there were demonstrations and protests after the Ferguson grand jury announcement, but only in one did they turn violent and descend into chaos, which says more about that city than it does about the fact that people decided to exercise their constitutional rights. And you guessed it, that city was Ferguson. Only in Ferguson did they declare a state of emergency before there was an emergency. And only in St. Louis County did gun sales increase by 700%, driven by white fears of black violence. And only in Ferguson did they call out the National Guard well before they were needed. And it just goes to show you that if you plan for violence, then guess what? You'll get violence. And perhaps certain people in Ferguson, the problem is they view other people as inherently violent. I mean, that revelation that Michael Brown was shot 12 times because Officer Wilson saw him as, quote, a demon, close quote. Well, perhaps it's time for Ferguson and the rest of the country to plan for peace. And as we do so, we should remember that Albert Einstein quote that peace cannot be kept by force, it can only be achieved by understanding. The next number up today is 935. Now, that's the length of an address by President Obama last night in the wake of the Ferguson grand jury announcement. And he said that the Ferguson grand jury announcement showed that we had a long way to go in this country, but that his election as president showed how far we had come. And he also said some other standard things that a person would say in the role of president in response to a controversial legal announcement. But what was interesting was the contrast of what Eric Holder said, the Attorney General. He said all that too, but also spoke more forcefully about what they were actually going to do about it, and that they were going to pursue every single avenue to achieve justice in this circumstance. But more than these two men is what's happening, not what they're saying, the circumstances rather than the words, and the irony that at a time when we have our first black president, we also have our most challenging time around race in perhaps a generation.